Welcome to the Akron Art Museum. I'm Jeff Katzen, the museum's curatorial fellow, and I'm here to take you on a tour of our two newest exhibitions, Totally Rad and Totally Radical. Let's go! Here we are in Totally Rad, bold color in the 1980s. In that decade, art found colorful resonance in all sorts of places. TV, music videos, video games, fashion, graffiti. It was a decade that was almost overflowing with color, to the point that some people now look back and say that the 80s were brash or excessive with all of that boldness. But the artists who so eagerly participated in all of it would definitely disagree. They found freedom, inventiveness, and even fun in testing out all of the wild possibilities that color had to offer. This wild sculpture by Nancy Graves is really the first work that got me thinking about color in the 1980s, leading up to this exhibition. It's made of bronze casts of found objects, and it really just seems like the artist took all sorts of things from around her, fans and fake food and wheels, and just put them all together into what is a really strange but really sort of exciting, unbalanced sculpture that looks like it could maybe get up and move around the gallery. To make this abstract painting, Charles Clough used a device that he called the big finger. While that sounds kind of foreboding, it's actually just a pad on the end of a pole or a stick, and he actually made all sorts of fingers of this type, big ones for big paintings and smaller ones for smaller paintings like this one, but all of them were called a big finger because they were bigger than the artist's own finger, and they prevented him from sort of taking specific control over where the paint would go, so that he could let it flow and just see what would happen and end up with all sorts of interesting, unpredictable results. Peter Dean had been using wild colors since the 1960s, and so when the 80s came around, the art world was finally catching up with him. In paintings like this one, he was inspired by the landscapes around his home in New York State, and I love how he just turns every bit of this scene into something that's exciting and vivid and full of energy and texture when you get up close to the work. Every little part of it, a tree or a field or a flower, becomes its own little event full of color and energy. Totally Radical, Art and Politics in the 1980s, focuses on works of art that contend with the serious political issues of what was a dense and significant decade in American history. The artists took on the Cold War with the Soviet Union, the AIDS crisis, issues of equality related to race and gender, environmental preservation, and more. Because this is the Bidwell Gallery, all of the works on view involve the medium of photography, and each artist took a different approach to that medium. The Guerrilla Girls combine photographic images with the boldness of advertising design to create eye-catching posters that convey strong messages about gender inequality and elitism, particularly in the art world. They would often strengthen their case by going to galleries and museums to gather statistics that they then put into their work. When I look at these posters, I'm really struck by not only the strength, just the directness, the immediacy of the messages that they convey, but also by the masterful graphic design, which makes those messages really visually appealing and grabs your attention. In the 1980s, Robert Rauschenberg created what he called the Rauschenberg Overseas Cultural Interchange. Through that program, he traveled all around the world, staging exhibitions and creating works of art like these. He hoped to suggest that freedom of artistic expression was a fundamental human right and to create international dialogue. The pictures that you see here include images that he took in the United States and in the Soviet Union. During the tense Cold War, he really hoped to suggest that these two countries had more in common than people realized. Ken Heyman gave himself a difficult photographic challenge by focusing on a subject that could be literally invisible, the AIDS epidemic. Because AIDS primarily affected gay men, and because of the stigma that they faced, politicians and news organizations often ignored the issue, especially during the early 1980s. Heyman's sensitive, really empathetic photographs insist, though, that men suffering from AIDS had full lives and emotions that were really worthy of consideration, and that consideration could be a first step toward real political action. Thank you for taking this video tour with me. Now that the museum is open again, I hope that you'll have a chance to come in and see these shows for yourself.